So I'm really, really excited to have John Simson here. John and I met years ago on a project called The Roots of American Music. John not only negotiated an incredibly complex deal as an attorney, but did it with great grace and aplomb, and kind of held a project together that could have fallen apart at any point. So it's wonderful to see him again. Since that time, he went on to work, I guess, for Sound Exchange and then become the executive director of Sound Exchange. Prior to that, you've got a long and storied career here, but I know you are a musician. I don't know if you're still playing or not.
I am.
Okay, great.
Too many guitars.
Too many guitars, yeah. And had a record deal. Then I know you managed Mary Chapin Carpenter, amongst others. And been a practicing lawyer as well as an adjunct professor at various law schools. So, again, thank you so much for...
My pleasure to be here.
Great. And it's our duty, John, tonight, which is the last forum with a bunch of very, very tired, very, very ready to get out of here students to try and be entertaining. So
Okay.
I am incapable of that, but I can tell just by looking at you that you aren't. So, all right. So first off, it's almost a year, right, from the day the music died, right?
Yeah.
This time last year, everybody was incredibly up in arms because you guys, the evil behemoth that is Sound Exchange, was killing all the web radio, right?
I guess that's what they were saying.
That's what they were saying. And,
Yeah.
and a lot of us were saying it, right?
Yeah, how many web stations actually shut down?
Well, this is the thing. So now, a year later, here we are. We don't know how many have shut down. I do know that GERD's just shut down. Gerd Leonard's thing shut down. But,
So that wasn't a web radio station.
I don't know what that was
Yeah.
exactly. It was a snowball truck. But so a year later, does the sword of Damocles still hang over these people? I mean, first bring us up to speed.
Sure. A year ago, as you say, everybody was yelling, "Oh, we're going out of business. We're going out of business," and a lot of it was misinformation, and a lot of it is that it's a very the webcasting industry right now is kind of a whole bunch of different companies that are in search of a business model, and there's a bunch of them who perhaps use music as a lost leader. Kind of the way Circuit City would sell CDs for $6.99, so you'd come in the store and buy the big screen TV. Like a Yahoo or an AOL, where they're trying to get you to the site, and then you'll use the email, you'll use whatever tools are there.
We don't care about Yahoo or AOL.
Okay.
We think they're jive, right? None of us in here care about Yahoo or AOL, right?
Not a
Point
problem.
of fact, I don't believe that anyone cares about AOL.
Last FM.
Okay. So
Anyone?
Last FM, Pandora, some of these things that we do care about.
Right. So
The
anyway,
dude from Pandora put on his site, "We're going down because of you guys."
Right.
Why did he say that, first of all?
well, it's always good to say we're going out of business. That way he got lots and lots of people to write Congress, and they were hoping to get a congressional fix, that Congress would pass legislation to actually legislate rates. The issue is they were looking for a legislative fix, and there was a bill introduced on the Hill in Congress that not only took back the rates that were set for 2006, but went back to the 2002 rates, a separate independent arbitration panel.
Okay, dear Lord, we cannot talk with words like separate arbitration panels and all that.
Okay.
Can we cut through, not you,
Yeah.
but can we, the royal we, as
Yeah.
they say in Lebowski, right? Can we cut through all the and just talk about what this stuff means?
Sure.
I have a radio, right? Because,
Okay.
all right, so I'm a radio, I got an ISP connection and a website, and I want to stream music on, right? Your job is to what? To collect from me to pay whom?
Sound Exchange represents all of the recording artists and all of the record labels in the United States, actually around the world. So we actually pay any label, any artist who's getting streamed online.
Okay, so first off, that raises an issue, right? Because the PROs, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, they pay only the writer. And the
Songwriter and publisher.
Right? So why would terrestrial radio have to pay less than internet radio?
It's unjustifiable. Internet radio pays, satellite radio pays, cable radio pays, over-the-air radio still doesn't pay, and it's only because the National Association of Broadcasters is such a powerful lobbying force. So let me just give you a quick history, if it's okay.
Please.
Can we do a quick history? Okay. 1909, the Copyright Act is overhauled.
Right.
Stephen Foster, great American songwriter, dies penniless, having written Old Folks at Home, Swanee, I Dream of Jeannie, all that stuff. Because he died
wrote
penniless.
I Dream of Jeannie?
I Dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair. Yeah, that's where the TV show. No. He died penniless, so songwriters went to Congress and got a law changed so that we had a performance right for songwriters. 1909, no record industry. In the Copyright Act, a performance right. When you play stuff in public, songwriters get paid. Radio is given birth in the 1920s. First advertisement on radio is 1922. ASCAP goes to radio, starts to collect money in the 1920s, and the NAB tries to shut ASCAP down. They also open up a tax-free music bureau for publishers whose stuff isn't as popular. Eventually, they give in and start paying ASCAP for the songwriters. But the recording industry is left out in the cold here.
The record labels.
The record labels. The recording industry starts to grow in the 1920s, and they keep trying to get a performance right, and the broadcasters say, no, and it's not in the Copyright Act. In fact, a big band leader, Paul Whiteman, in 1939, filed a lawsuit against radio stations. What he did was he had RCA put on his label, not authorized for radio play. Radio still played it. He sued them. He won, actually, in the lower court. But the federal appeals court said, no, there's no copyright in a sound recording in the Copyright Act. You lose. We had a little thing in between there right after that in 1940, between 40, called the World War II. And so nothing happened for about 10 years. And then in the 50s, Sinatra picked up this banner and said, hey, they're playing the song because I'm singing it, not because of who wrote it. It's okay that the songwriters get paid, but I should get paid too. Sinatra couldn't get a performance right. I'm amazed, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I actually thought he owned Congress.
Well, he tended to get what he wanted.
Yeah, that's true. But
his microphone never fell out of his pants.
Exactly. Unintentionally. But in any event, in the 60s, bootlegging actually became a problem for the recording industry. It was the very first time technologically that you started having people making bootleg recordings, the vinyl, you know, the basement tapes, whatever it was. And so in 1972, the recording industry was able to get a copyright in a sound recording. Imagine that. 50 years later, they finally got a copyright to protect their sound recordings.
What year was it?
72.
72 was the first year of the copyright.
My album came out in 71, so how foolish do I feel now that my record came out 2 months before I would have had a copyright in it.
And what type of royalties would that have generated for you?
Well, nothing, because, you know, I mean, I played so much. I got so successful I went to law school. But I did open for Jethro Tull on one Aqualung tour date, and it was very humbling, but fun.
So one Aqualung fan here.
One Aqualung fan. All right, good.
Very vocal Aqualung fan.
You know, best heavy metal band in the Grammys.
Not surprisingly.
So anyway, 72, they get a copyright. But the deal that was struck with the broadcasters was, we'll let you have the copyright so you can pursue piracy and bootlegging, but you don't get a performance right. That was the quid pro quo for getting the copyright. Fast forward to 1976, and Congress overhauls the Copyright Act, and the record industry says, hey, we need a performance right like just about every other major country in the world. And the broadcasters say, well, we don't really want to pay. So Congress says, let's do a study. So they do a study, and the Register of Copyrights does the study. The Ringer Report comes out in 78. U.S. performers should have a performance right like the rest of the world. Congress doesn't act on it. In the late 1980s, Sinatra wrote a letter to 30 major recording artists, the chairman of the board writing to the boss. It was a great optic, I think. But nothing happened again in 88. In 95, the recording industry came to me as a manager and said, hey, we have a coalition we're building. We need some more artists and managers to get on board. And I got on board and I helped lobby to get a law passed in 1995. It was called the Digital Performance Right and Sound Recordings Act. This was the first time that performers in the United States had any kind of performance right where they got paid when their songs were being played, streamed, in any medium. And it was limited to digital. So digital, satellite, cable were our limitations. The only way we got the law passed was with the broadcaster's blessing, and their blessing came at a high price, which was, we're grandfathered. We don't have to pay you over the air. And when we go to HD radio, we're not paying either, even though that looks exactly like satellite and internet radio. So the broadcasters claimed they didn't have to pay when they were online. They filed a lawsuit against the Copyright Office, Bonneville versus Peters, Bonneville Communications against Mary Beth Peters, Register of Copyrights, and they lost. So broadcasters have been paying me for their simulcasts when they're online.
So if WXPN simulcasts something on their website, they pay whom?
They pay Sound Exchange well, they pay all the artists and labels.
Right.
And we
Via
collect it,
sound exchange.
and then we distribute it, correct.
Okay.
And I think one of the things people don't realize is we represent the industry, the artists, the labels.
All right, fine. Be that as it may.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with the RIAA?
They created us.
Or who we like to refer to as Voldemort.
I always thought it was the evil empire.
Either
Same thing?
one.
Okay.
Same thing, yeah.
They built us in the very beginning.
They built you.
They did. Who else would have the money?
They built you. It's like Frankenstein's monster.
Well, you know, someone created us, and then we were spun off as an independent nonprofit in 2003.
So you have no more relationship with the RIAA?
We have none.
Zero.
Zero. Well, I have an RIAA board member.
Always. There's always. What about? Don't you? Isn't your chief counsel? Wasn't he or she RIAA?
My general counsel worked there. I rescue people from the RIAA.
Or you pull them out. They built you and
over to the artist side,
yeah.
over to the
Okay.
to the light side.
So you're all right. So you're collecting money. You're dividing it up between the copyright holders, the labels.
Typically, some of the artists own their own masters.
Right, more and more, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And then you're also paying the writers themselves.
No, the writers we don't pay. ASCAP, BMI, CSEC pay writers.
Okay, good. All right, so you
We have
don't
nothing
pay
to
the-
do with paying writers.
So it's all the performers and then the copyright holders.
Correct. Basically, the way our royalties get split up is set in the statute, Section 114 of the copyright law. For any of you who want to go look at it, 50% goes to the sound recording copyright owner, typically a label, but more and more artists own their own masters. 45% goes to the featured performer, and that's always an interesting thing to figure out who the featured performer is. And 5% goes to the background musicians and vocalists. And there's actually a trust fund that's been created that collects that royalty and then distributes it to the players
and
on the
there's
record.
a lot of hoo-ha about that, too, right? That you guys have this black box amount of money waiting to be claimed, and why can't you find these people that are everywhere?
Well, it's not a question of us finding them. Let's put it this way. It's a question of them coming forward and registering.
So they have to come to you.
Yeah. We certainly do a lot of work
Right.
and in going out. I mean, we're at every major conference. We are very public about trying to find people. I would say that, you know, again, we follow the dollar, as I think any business would, trying to be efficient. We are one of the first long-tailed companies in the music industry. There are tens of thousands of people being played online. What happens, for example, XM and Sirius, every month they send us their entire playlist of their music channels. We crunch that against our database, and we probably match 90, 92%, 94%. We throw bodies at the remaining 6%, 4%, whatever it happens to be on a monthly
That
basis.
just speaks to how bad XM and Sirius are.
Well, no.
Because they're just playing the same that the Terrestrial's playing.
Wrong.
No, for the most part, it's not.
Bluesville, I mean, they play blues, they play Hawaiian, they play children's. I mean, they have tons of stuff that you'll never hear on mainstream radio. XM typically takes about a 3,000 deep song catalog. I'm not saying they're different. The other thing is webcasters.
Well, and I think that's really, okay, so put yourself, I mean, I'm just trying to understand, because I've been a vocal defender of sound exchange,
Okay.
right? In the sense of, look, you know, we need to compensate these performers. I tend to fall on the side of the writer, maybe it's just habit or whatever. I'm less concerned about compensating the label, even though I ran one for a long time, right? You know, for some reason, I think we need to move to this stage where the artists are their own labels, and I guess then at that point it doesn't matter if you're compensating the label or the performer or whatever. But I'm still really confused as to why there was just the ferocious backlash against Sound Exchange a year ago.
I think a lot of people are saying, we're going out of business. And a lot of people like their web radio station. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's a very complicated area on both sides. So, for example, on the Sound Exchange side, we have over 3,500 independent labels, as well as the 4 major labels.
Right.
We have over 31,000 artists signed up to Sound Exchange. Now, within that range, I've got young bands that are happy to give their stuff away for play on Pandora. And what they want is to go out and tour. Now, that's not going to work for Charlie Parker's widow. She doesn't want to give Charlie stuff away and go out and tour. Take my word. No, and so I think what you realize is within the realm of Sound Exchange, and again, we're trying to be a big tent representing a lot of different interests.
Yeah.
It's very hard on a statutory license. Think about publishing. Under Section 115, you pay 9 cents every time someone downloads your song.
Right.
We don't have a special rate for non-commercial labels. We don't have a special rate for religious broadcasters. We don't have a special rate for big versus small. We've been trying to figure out a way in the performance world to come up with one rate that fits all these different companies.
It can't happen.
So we have, take an initiative. We offered essentially all non-coms a special rate, which we offered last May. And that special rate was
$500.
$500 a year for 99%.
Per channel.
No, it was actually per service, up to 3 channels.
Up to 3 channels. Well, okay.
So that covers almost every college radio station, all the religious broadcasters. There's a handful of people
But
it doesn't
John, isn't there? Okay, so isn't that the sword of Damocles, though? So this wasn't an agreement on your part. It was like, okay, this is how we're going to do it for now, as long as you continue to negotiate in good faith. And at any time you don't continue to negotiate in good faith, we can retroactively go. But no.
No. This was an offer we made to the non-commercial community and said, look, we recognize you're different than commercial stations. We are going to offer you this deal through 2010.
Right.
And this was back in 2007.
Right.
So we were offering through, and that's the end of the period. It would be hard for us to go beyond there. Now, if someone came to us and said,
but it may be. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, I think this is something we've talked about. I know I've talked about it in my classes to the point of making my students crazy. But amongst other things I talk about that makes them crazy. But at 2000, why is it? Because we don't know what happens at 2000. We're talking about 2 years from now, right? And so I think that some of the backlash has been, look, this web radio thing is a formative thing. Why are you crippling innovation? I mean, if I'm going to take the opposing side to Sound Exchange, it's, look, right now, we need everything we can do to make people value music and find sustainable business models out of it, and we don't need to put up any hurdles in people's path. That said, songwriters have to be paid or whatever, but don't de-incent them to the point where they just say, forget it.
yeah, but I think what you have to recognize is we are going through a fundamental shift in the music industry and how people consume music.
Well, sure, and that's why your history started. On day 7, the Earth was created and it was good. That stuff doesn't work anymore.
Well, exactly right.
You can't have both ways. You can't say, well, look, the 1909, blah blah blah, and then say it's a fundamental shift. You can't apply those things to today.
Well, no, but if we had a performance right from radio, the music and the performers especially would have gotten, in the last 30 years, it would be $9 billion that songwriters have gotten paid from radio through ASCAP and BMI. So it's the point.
Well, where did that money go?
The radio stations kept it. So basically, it was their shareholders who were enriched. In every other major country,
there's a counter argument to that, right?
I don't think so at all. They'll promotion. We're promoting your artists. We help you sell concert tickets. We help you sell,
if that counter argument doesn't work, then why are all these labels insisting on 360 deals?
Because they're not making any money selling CDs anymore.
No, they're saying that the promotion that they're providing is valuable because it represents merchandising and touring and all those other things.
What the labels are saying is, if we're not going to get paid through selling CDs anymore, we have to figure out another way to get paid.
Right, and you just said that there's no promotional value to
No, I didn't say no promotional value. For example,
de minimis?
John Grisham sells a novel to become a movie. It's going to promote the sale of his book when that movie comes out and people see the movie.
Yeah,
does he get nothing for the sale of the movie?
I'm far more interested in the work of Charles Bukowski, right?
But it doesn't matter.
It does matter.
No.
It does matter if we're continuing to create these structures in which innovation gets stifled and the smaller...
We're not trying to stifle innovation. What we're trying to do is get paid.
Personally. I'm just posing the question because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think these are the issues that people are having with your service.
Sure. Look, when we look at, there's 20 big companies that pay 95% of the royalties in webcasting. Most of them are multi-billion-dollar corporations. You have a handful of small upstarts like Pandora, like Live 365. We are trying very hard to work with those companies, pure plays you might call them, to see if we can't structure a deal that allows them to continue and at the same time doesn't undercut the rates that have been set that all these big companies can afford to pay.
And that's
what's
problem.
being lost.
That's the issue, right?
Well, here's the point. In a statutory license where judges look at evidence for 18 months and look at everybody's financials and look at this is a rate that people can afford to pay. And the big guys can afford to pay it. How do you then deal with the small guys?
In the same way that Terrestrial, that ASCAP and BMI issue their blanket license based on scope.
But again, there's no scope here. In other words, if we...
There is scope. Why is there not scope? If I'm a webcaster that has a reach of X audience versus AOL that has X to a multiple of 500.
Because many of these webcasters are not trying to monetize. They're not interested in earning advertising dollars to make it scalable. They want to amass a lot of people so they can flip the company. I mean, look at Last FM. This is a company with no revenue that sells for $280 million. Pandora's
to
going to be
CBS.
Right.
Right.
Now,
Who
Pandora...
has plenty of room to pay, which is then, that only benefits you in the long run.
But if you're going to use content to aggregate eyeballs, we got no piece of the $280 million that CBS
No,
paid
but
Last.fm.
you'll make sure now that Last.fm is going to pay you the full rate that you want because they're owned by CBS.
Again.
And if you had cut them off at the knees, this is the whole argument.
But we didn't cut them off at the knees. They paid as a
But
small webcaster, and they were able to use one of our creative licenses to grow and get sold. We would like to make sure that we're getting paid value if someone's using our music to aggregate people that they're then going to flip. You look at Pandora's board, it's all venture capital.
But that's not your role, right? Your role is to represent the artist, and the performer, and in theory the label, right?
Correct.
Your role is not to arbitrate, who gets to flip what and what their business models are.
No, our job is to represent performers
Right.
and record companies and make sure they're being paid fairly when someone's using their
And the
content.
quickest way to make sure they're not getting paid is to reduce the number of outlets for them.
We're not trying to reduce the number of outlets.
But
On the other hand, it's not our job. Our job is to get paid fairly. And
It's not your job at all. Your job is to be a pass-through agent to these artists. You keep saying it's your job like it's your money.
No. The artists and the labels have said to us, represent us in these negotiations. We represent all of the industry in industry-wide negotiations with the other side.
Right.
Okay? The reason that our board of 9 artists and 9 labels
Are there any musicians on your board?
Yeah. Well, we have managers who represent musicians.
But no musicians.
Musicians don't have time to be...
Ah, dear Lord.
We used to have...
How can you not have a musician on your board?
We used to have Amy Mann and David Sanborn, and now we have their managers instead, because Amy and David were very busy, touring, making records, doing the things that artists do. And the amount of time that's required for sound exchange is pretty intense.
Seems like you should have an artist on your board.
Well, so we have Michael Houseman. Michael was the drummer.
Manages Amy.
He was the drummer until Tuesday, and he manages Amy, and he manages Suzanne Vega, Mark Cohn, and a bunch of others. Pat Raines manages David Sanborn. He's married to Jonathan Brooke.
Jonathan Brooke. Yeah.
So she's an artist. I mean,
Still seems like you should have.
Tom Lee, who's the head of. We have the Musicians Union on our board. They represent 100,000.
I'm giving you a hard time.
I know. Jeez. I think I'm going on Fox News next because it's fair and balanced. And no,
I'm really trying to be balanced. I mean,
I understand.
I really do believe that I'm trying to weigh the fact that the artists need to get paid with the fact that the artists desperately need the exposure. And I worry primarily that any hurdle put in place to those artists getting that exposure is potentially a negative one. And the balance that has to be struck is don't, get them paid, but don't de-incent them from doing this. And I still don't get 100% why there couldn't be some sort of scale in the same way that a terrestrial college radio station pays a much smaller blanket license.
We have that. I mean, any small webcaster, if anybody has under $1,250,000 in revenue, they can pay 10% of their first $250,000 in revenue and 12% up to $1,250,000. And once they go above that, they graduate into the big webcaster category. Now, that's for commercial webcasters. Those webcasters, by their, and again, I'm just quoting them, are paying about 1/12 of what they pay under the per play rate. Right. So they can afford to pay about 1/12 of what Yahoo can afford, or what Pandora actually can afford, or Live 365. And then the non-com webcasters are paying even less than that.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, it used to be $500 for a college radio station, any non-commercial station, $250 for colleges under 10,000 students. And that was for all the music they played for the entire year. So, it's a pretty good deal.
I appreciate so much talking this through, because you have to admit it is a complicated thing.
Very complicated.
And it is something that, and this is kind of why I was asking, how did this become such a contentious thing? And I hope, this is an opportunity for you. I mean, you've articulated that you're trying to make this work.
One thing that I think would really help make it even more clear, we represent the entire industry. So when you're setting a rate, do you set the rate at, Kanye West's hits or whatever, or do you set them at my record, collector's item? But no, I mean, where do you set the rate?
Right.
So the bands that want to give their stuff away, they can do that. anyone has the ability to do their own direct deal. They don't even have to opt out of Sound Exchange. All they have to say is, I want to give this webcaster, small webcaster, free music because I think they help my career.
So they can make a deal. So you know, the Shins want their music played on Last FM for free.
Right.
They have to do what to make that happen?
They sign a little piece of paper with Last FM that says, you hereby have a royalty-free license. Hopefully it's not in perpetuity. Hopefully they do it for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And then renew it if they want or not. But every artist has the right, if they own their masters, or every label has the right, to do direct licensing. We don't control that.
And you kind of hit the crux of the monkey there, too, right? You can see artists doing this potentially for promotional value, which you don't believe is,
well, no,
is valid.
I think
it's de minimis.
I think it's de minimis.
Okay, but a label ain't going to do that.
Well, some labels will.
Indies.
Well, yeah, the majors are probably not going to do it.
Right.
The indies may, but you know what? That's fine. I mean, let the services be more indie. I mean, we're fine with that.
Okay. Can I change the subject a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you clarify some things with regards to, because more and more people are listening to music on MySpace or places like that. What is your relationship, if any, to MySpace or iLike or services where, you know, they're streaming, be it 30-second clips or full songs? Do you guys can collect on that?
We have no right to collect from those services.
Why is that?
In the law, in Section 114, we're very narrowly defined as only collecting, from non-interactive services. So that means it has to be a radio-like stream that you're hearing. If you're able to click on a song and hear the song when you want it, that's interactive, and immediately those rights are exclusive to the copyright owner, typically the label, could be the artist, and you have to negotiate with each and every one. It's a couple of things. I mean, when you go to iTunes, when you go to some services, they don't have everything. The Beatles aren't there. Other major bands aren't there because you have to negotiate with each label, and some of the labels don't even have the rights for some of their artists in the digital world. Under our license, you cannot opt out of our license. That's one of the problems when you set a rate in a statutory license where Congress says, hey, webcasters, you can play anything ever released under U.S. law, and they can't say no. The Beatles can't come to me and say, oh, the prices aren't high enough for us. We want out. They can't say that. So this is the easy button, kind of like, you know, you pay one fee, you tell the Copyright Office, I want in, I pay $20, and then all you have to do is pay Sound Exchange the rates, and you're covered. And we do all the work to track down tens of thousands of artists, all the independent labels, and figuring out how to distribute the money based on what's being played. Any service, and there are some that do this, can go to individual copyright owners, whether they're artists or labels, and make direct deals on whatever terms they want. So, you know, it's much harder. Obviously, your transaction costs are higher. Right. We make it easy for them to exist. And I mean, while we may be in a dispute over rates with Pandora, Pandora loves us from the standpoint that we pay all of the artists they play, and they don't have to go track them down.
Yeah, and it obviates any, you know.
Yeah, they could never exist without that.
In the same way that radio couldn't exist without an ASCAP.
And a BMI.
But so I'm still unclear. So if MySpace becomes the default place where people go to hear their music, nothing is generated for the.
No, they actually have to get deals done with every copyright owner. Because it's not just that they get it for free; it's an exclusive right to whoever owns it.
To?
Yeah.
So
which is why you've seen
if one
lawsuits.
of our students goes up in their MySpace page and puts their music up, and all of a sudden it gets 10 billion streams or whatever.
Well, there's terms of use when you put your own music up on MySpace.
Right.
And make sure you have a good lawyer check it out, or understand what you're getting into, because typically you're waiving your right to get anything. At least that's what I understand. Because we don't have anything to do with that. I haven't really looked at their click license. Yeah. And again, I think those licenses are pretty much that you can opt out when you want to. You just take your music down, and if you want to, or restrict the use. But it's important to understand what rights you're giving away anytime that you're doing that with Facebook or iMeme or whoever it might be. I know Last FM has a you can click different or check different boxes. One is which Sound Exchange collects for me on non-interactive, but we'll pay you directly
because they have a different type of model.
Right, they have both. They have both interactive and non-interactive.
Well, where do you see it going? I mean, you're in the trenches on this.
Obviously I've now been doing this for 8 years, and it seems to me that the interactive world is where it's going to go. Pandora is probably my favorite service of the music discovery services, and it's it's quite interactive. I mean, you sit there and you tell what artists you like and what you don't like and things like that, and then it tries to play you a customized stream. You can skip, I think, up to 6 songs if you don't like them.
But you can't rewind.
You can't rewind, and then you can go to the next channel if you're unhappy with what you're getting. But I think services like Rhapsody. The hard part with Rhapsody is I think it's a bargain for the monthly fee they charge when you can just basically click on anything and stream it and hear it, download it to a device and carry it with you. I mean, hundreds of thousands of tracks. I do see that some of the online subscription services at $2.99. Obviously even a cheaper price point. I wonder what's going to happen when WiMAX is finally everywhere. I keep hearing, it's going to be next year. I mean, is it 2013? I'm not sure. But, I think we're going to see a convergence some point in the next 5-6 years when people who have XM and Sirius in their car will have the choice of having them or having internet radio. The problem that we see is right now, and again, we're very pragmatic looking at the business. Satellite radio generates about $115 a year for each of their subscribers. If I'm getting paid now under the CRB rate 6% this year, up to 8% in 2012, the rate escalates. It's roughly $7 a year per listener for the music they listen to. Over-the-air radio pays me nothing. They generate about $80 a year on advertising for each of their listeners. Internet radio right now generates $3.50 for each of their listeners. So if I were to say, oh yeah, pay me what satellite pays me, that 6% would be 21 cents. I can't live with that. They're not in the business right now of selling advertising. If they were, when you were listening to internet radio, they'd actually have ads in the streams. But they've said, well, that's what makes over-the-air radio bad or suck. I mean, I'm just quoting somebody. If you're not going to have in-stream ads on internet radio, and what you're going to do is have graphic ads on your website, don't be surprised when an advertiser says, well, gee, I listen to internet radio, and what I do is I launch my station, and then I minimize it, and I do my email and my documents on my computer. How many people are looking at the graphic ads? So it's no surprise to me that they've had a hard time selling graphic ads. What happens when they go into the car? Clearly, graphic ads on the dashboard not going to work when you're driving.
Be surprised.
I mean, although I guess people's DVDs are working in the front seat already, even if they're not supposed to.
So, I mean, we're as you said, we're at kind of something of an inflection point. Well,
let me just say, as I mentioned, and again, it's hard, but 80% of the people, the big services, are paying the current rates. There's a very small, 80% of the big companies that have been paying 95% of my royalties are paying in at the current rates. There's a small handful that says we can't afford it. We've been sitting down with them now for over a year, trying to negotiate, trying to figure out a creative way.
Not easy.
So it's not easy. And again, what happens is, not only is it not easy, but you have, as I mentioned, on our side, you have a really wide array between the brand new artists and the established artists and estates and heirs. And you have everything from major labels to really small indies. On their side, you've got multiplex services like AOL and Yahoo and Microsoft. And Microsoft diverted all their streaming through Pandora. You have Pandora and Live, and then you have a variety of MTV. I mean, you have their side is just as tough to wrangle as our side is. So these negotiations have been, fascinating, and hopefully they'll end up being productive.
So what is their best point to ask you to take the other side?
I think their best point is they don't play the same 30 songs over and over again. Right. They play better music.
And they would argue that people are coming to them not so much for the music because of the filtering process, because that they provide value that goes beyond the music, so why should they just be...
I don't think that's really what they say.
Okay.
I think where the big dispute is they'll say, we're promotional the way radio's promotional. And we'll say, well, you really haven't shown that. I mean, while we've had a growth in internet radio, from 0 to 50 million people in the last 8-10 years, we've had a decrease in album sales from 18 billion to 10 billion if you correct it in today's dollars. So we've had a CD business that's going away for all intents and purposes. And basically I think that what we're seeing is a change in consumption patterns. Consumers access more music than ever.
You've had a product that's figured out how to self-replicate and show
Well,
up on people's doorstep.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, if bread did that, bread sales would go down too.
And Mercedes too.
Yeah.
And I've always said music can be free when Mercedes are free. You know, because then
Well, when Mercedes starts self-replicating and driving into your driveway,
I'll be
very happy. Yeah.
I'm there. I'm there. Although actually, I'd rather I think have a hybrid, but that's. Thank you.
One hybrid fan out there. Right?
Thank you very much.
Well, what's an artist to do? What's a young upstart web person to do? I mean, to my mind, they're the same person.
Yeah. Well, again, I think what we want to do is try to find a place where the marketplace works. And again, you know, this is early days. It's certainly a challenge. I think in a lot of ways, we've met the challenge with much more openness and a willingness to try to work. I mean, we extended these experimental deals through 2010. And again, when we extended them,
what happens in 2010?
Well, here's the point. Congress basically said that every 5 years there's a new proceeding where these judges look at the marketplace and set rates.
Right.
Now, you know, one of the things that we're looking at right now is, you know, should we have a deal that goes through 2015? Like, let's do a 10-year deal. Frankly, I would much prefer not to have to spend money on litigation every 5 years. Yeah. These are expensive proceedings. When you're up against Clear Channel and AOL and Yahoo, you know, for the most part, you're up against really big law firms, and they, you know.
But and it's also transactional for the upstarts. I mean, it is a true barrier to entry. And to some extent, even before they've spent any money, they're just saying, I can't even get into that game.
Oh, no. It's actually the easiest thing in the world. When you think about it, you pay $20 to the Copyright Office. You take the small webcaster license, and until you get to $1,250,000 in revenue, you have an easy deal.
You know, I looked around on your site a little bit. It's a little flash heavy for my like, but I couldn't find stuff. You know, how clear is that on your site?
It's very clear, and I have people, two licensing specialists, and when people call, these guys point them right to the place, explain to them what, you know, the deal is, and you know, the biggest problem I have right now, there's a group of large, small webcasters, and I think there's 6 of them.
Large,
Jumbo Shrimp.
Small, yes, right.
Okay. Yeah. There's 6 big, small webcasters, and their biggest issue.
Tiny, huge.
Yeah, their biggest problem.
Their smallest big problem.
Their smallest big problem is we want to limit them, because think of it this way: small radio station in a small market is only going to be able to broadcast to a certain number of people.
Right.
There's only so many people in Scotland, Kentucky.
Right.
You're always going to be a small station. Okay.
Until you can jump on the internet and
well,
become a, you know.
When you're online,
right.
you could be the smallest little town in the world, and you could have the biggest audience.
Well, we have one of those stations here, OZ.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's one that probably gets streamed as much as just about any other station.
Right. Yeah. OZ, KCRW, XPN,
right.
KEXP Seattle.
Right.
I mean, those are obviously my biggest NPR stations,
right.
or not public stations. And by the way, it looks like we have a deal in principle with NPR.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, we've agreed on most everything. We're still, the biggest issue tends to be reporting. How much data do they have to give us? And, you know, people somehow think that we want reporting for punitive reasons, and clearly it's not that at all. I want as much data as I can, so I pay fairly the performers who are getting played.
Sure.
And clear to me that public radio has always played different artists than commercial radio. So in our old days, before we had this digital world, when I was representing independent artists and labels, typically the ASCAP sample or the BMI sample wouldn't pick up certain indie artists. So they wouldn't get paid.
Right.
And, you know, it was always a complaint. And I said, gee, we're in the digital world. We should be able to have census data. There's no reason why people can't send me once a month everything they've played. It's hitting a button.
It's in their interest. And then the faster we get to that, the better for everyone.
Right. So we've been really working with NPR. How quickly can you ramp up to that? How much time do we have to give you? And so we're working on those kinds of issues. And frankly, we're looking at technology solutions if we can employ them.
Sure.
I'll try to make it as easy as I can for them. At the same time, I want a certain amount of data and a commitment that they understand why we want the data. And you know, there's been times when, you know.
So what would you say to the pissed off artist or webcaster that's mad at Sound Exchange?
You know, I mean, we're the wrong target. They're sort of misplacing it.
Right.
I mean, we're trying to, essentially without us, the industry wouldn't work at all. Because there's no webcaster who could reach out and pay 10,000 artists or 10,000 labels. The transaction costs would be too high. They need us there to do that. We have, I mean, we're very small compared. I mean, ASCAP and BMI are in the hundreds and hundreds of people.
You're
we
nonprofit as well, I see.
We're 32 people right now. So it's a very tiny staff trying to do a huge amount of work.
You are a nonprofit.
We are a nonprofit. We're a 501c6, which is a trade association to represent our constituents. We've processed over 2 billion tracks on track level. At a time when the industry is struggling to move from CD accounting to track level accounting.
And there would be an argument that with that small size, how effective can you be at accurately gauging this stuff?
Oh, it's all technology. I mean, and we have very sophisticated technology. We probably have the best system in the world for doing this. And, we've shown that we can do it,
right,
where 85% of our transactions are under a penny, and now you aggregate it.
Yeah.
This past year we'll probably have done $140 million, up from $63 million the year before. So it's growing quickly. Most of the growth is in satellite radio.
Satellite, yeah.
It's, web radio is probably 20-25% of the royalties in
the
aggregate.
Vocal 20%.
It's very
vocal. The 80-20 rule. So we've got about a few minutes left. What questions do you all have? The mics are up there for anyone to come. Come on, Reed.
Will there ever be a performance royalty on terrestrial radio?
We certainly hope so. The broadcaster's exemption, which is now over 80 years, is really unfair, and there's a number of ways you can highlight it. One is that we are the only copyright, the sound recording is the only copyright that's capable of being performed that doesn't have a full performance right. Second thing is it's now the only platform. Internet radio pays, cable radio pays, satellite radio pays. Over-the-air radio is the only platform that doesn't pay. And if you look at the 30 countries that are part of an organization called the OECD, which is all of the modern free market democratic countries in the world, we are the only country that doesn't have a performance right for its performers. Which puts us in the company of China and North Korea, people that we want to stand with on a copyright. We go out into the world saying, hey, we're an IP leader, you need to, and here we are, the third world when it comes to artist rights. So those three anomalies make it clear that when you talk to people about it, and actually when you go to Congress and say, hey, when you hear Aretha Franklin singing Respect, she gets nothing, but Otis Redding's estate gets paid because he wrote the song. Most of them look at you like, really? I mean, they just don't know. So a lot of it's been an educational process for us. We've brought a lot of people to Capitol Hill to educate them, traditional artists from a lot of different genres, everyone from Thievery Corporation to Mary Wilson of the Supremes to Sam Moore of Sam and Dave. We've had hearings. We now have 2 bills introduced, one in the House and one in the Senate, that would end radio's exemption. We are hoping we can, move these through. It's going to, we know this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're up against one of the most powerful lobbies in the United States. Every congressman needs their local broadcaster to get elected. They want to get on the radio, they want to get on TV to get elected. It's tough for them to vote against the broadcaster. And the broadcasters have been calling this a performance tax. And we've been kind of pointing out that a tax is usually collected by the government for the public good. This is actually a royalty. It's the same thing you did in the 20s when you called ASCAP's, attempt to collect a tax. We've tried to sit down with them and say, look, let's just work out something because this is a transitional period for radio, as they move online. But they're not willing. 0 is the only acceptable number for them. So we have these bills introduced. This is a major election year, as I think there's going to be a lot going on in Washington over the next 4 or 5 months. So probably it's a next year at the earliest, but it's something that the artist groups are really committed to. There's 13 organizations who've created the Music First Coalition, musicfirstcoalition.org. You should check out the website, and it's everybody from a lot of indie bands who are part of the coalition to Jay-Z and Christina Aguilera to Andrea Bocelli to jazz artists, Gerald Veasley.
And that's really what you guys need. You need some of these artists standing up and saying, and maybe you have them already, Sound Exchange is really helping us, with the
and we do, but here's the point. What you also have to understand is anytime we take on a battle with webcasters, we're going to lose the war, because they stream to 50 million people a week. So if they're, the day the music died is a perfect example. Yeah. We're going out of business. We're going out of business unless you write Congress. So about 1% of their audience wrote Congress. Right. It's a huge amount of letters, 500,000 letters. Yeah. We went to our membership and said, hey, look, these judges who looked at this, there are a lot of people who can't afford these rates. It's big companies. Save Net Radio was paid for by the biggest 10 companies trying to get the rates down for themselves. If they help save some little guys, fine, but I don't think, that's not really was their aim.
It seems like a PR issue, frankly.
10% of our audience, our 35,000 constituents, wrote. So we got 3,500.
3,500 letters versus...
But we got a much bigger percentage.
Right.
It's just, we're going to lose that war even if 100% of my members wrote. So it's always a big problem when you're taking on the megaphone.
Okay, there's other questions. I've talked enough. Greg?
So, to my understanding, you have internet radio stations pay $500 in order to provide service of having a radio station on the internet. Now, for some radio station that wants to get started, doesn't have very many people listening to it, isn't bringing in money, and they're wanting to feature mainly independent artists who are trying to do touring, not even really looking to get money from they're getting money from other places, from the shows that they're trying to get people to come to, such as that. How have you, I guess, dealt with the smaller people, as in they don't even want to bring in money? Their artists are saying, we don't want money from this, we want money from other things, we want the exposure. I feel that it's not addressed in such that, like, the people who aren't looking for money from this source aren't really represented that well. I know you said that people could sign and say, well, we don't want money, we'll waive our rights for this particular internet radio source, but if the internet radio source isn't ever going to be bringing in that amount of money, then how are they supposed to exist?
I think you raise an interesting point. The point is this: should we have rates that are so low that that the smallest of small webcasters can exist on a statutory license, so that Clear Channel and XM and Sirius and all these other services that are billion-dollar companies get 20 time reductions in their rates that they can't afford, just so we let the smallest guy exist? Or should the smaller service have to do a little bit more work and go to these bands and artists that they want to play and these labels and say, look, I can't afford to pay the royalties. I can't afford the $500 a year or whatever it might be. Because frankly, in the beginning, they're going to pay $500 and that's it if they have a small audience. But they can go out and make deals with all the bands they play to waive the royalty. And then they owe me nothing. Okay. They're free to do that. I mean, it's a little bit harder for them. Obviously, they've got to do a lot more work. They're going to have to contact all of the bands that they play. Now, if you're a band and you're getting played on both this small little webcaster and AOL, or whoever, don't you want to get the royalties that you're earning from XM and Sirius, who are billion-dollar corporations who can afford to pay you? You may want to give the little webcaster a direct deal and say, yeah, you're doing a lot. You link to my website. You feature me. I think this is great. But, I want to get paid by the big guys, but I'll give you a direct deal. I mean, that's the best thing of all worlds.
So you're saying it's possible to have an internet radio station in which every artist that I'm playing has given me a waiver to play their stuff, and I don't have to pay you anything?
Correct. And there are some who are out there already who've done that.
Well, that clarifies things.
It's interesting you say XM and Sirius multi-billion-dollar industry. Neither of them made a dime. So you've been talking about these little guys, and then XM and Sirius, these big guys. Their path to profitability is monstrously screwed.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, look, you can look at it a lot of different ways, but if they're going to pay, Howard Stern $100 million voluntarily,
I know.
I don't want to get paid less than they pay his manager, which is what they offered us.
But and the thing that keeps troubling me is that at times it seems like you're trying to impose your business judgment on some of these companies, and to a point, I think the better argument is, look, we got to collect for our performers and our labels. That's the argument. Well, not change your business model. It's like, look, here's what you got to pay: $500 or opt out or whatever. But to kind of, if you start trying to give them incentive, that's where you get into big. Because a lot of these companies you're mentioning got big by being able to hover under the radar for a while and aggregate a constituency and then build on it.
I think, George, you raised the right point, which is we don't care about that, frankly. How they build their business is how they build their business.
Right.
What we care about is if they're using music to build their business, we want to get paid fairly for it. And I think
artists need to be paid fairly for it. And this is the thing that keeps bothering me. It's not you, and I understand you're representing them.
When
But it
I
would
say
be-
we, I'm talking about
the
31,000
royal we,
performers.
I know.
Yeah, I'm
But
not talking about
it still
we
would
take
be better from a PR point of view if you said, I think.
I do that all the time. I mean, it's clear that we are the
I'm
artists.
just
we
trying to understand.
We are
the
35 independent, 3,500 independent labels, 31,000 performers.
Right.
You know, again, I mean, you can dice it or parse it if you want.
No,
I think
really
you're
just
getting
resting-
semantic on me, and I don't want you to be anti-semantic.
Right, I don't want to be anti-Semitic. And we
just
got to
go.
wrap up, but I do think that it's part of the issue because the whole premise of this conversation, and a lot of times, whether you knew it or not, I'm taking the devil's advocate because I really want to understand, right? And one thing that's come through in this conversation is that I think that a big part of the problems is just this lack of understanding, and that lack of understanding very much relates to semantics.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
But, you know, when we go, for example, the way the world is structured, this is a compulsory license, as I mentioned. No one can opt out. What Congress said was both sides get together and try to reach a voluntary solution. And if we can't, then there's 3 judges they've appointed who will determine it. And both sides put on their evidence, and then they will decide, you know, what happens. Both sides put on their case, and when we put on our case, we're just trying to put on the case that's most favorable to us as performers. We put on independent labels, we put on major labels, we put on independent artists, we put on major artists testifying for sound exchange. Because that's who we are. We're everybody.
John, this has been great. I'm sorry we're out of time.
Fine.
I want to thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Do virtuous work.
Thank you.